talking about it. And we're talking about the levels of everybody.
Yeah.
Like, this is the first streaming that like every single part I could hear
Oh yeah.
level. Because it's always the thing with those
10:29.
1029.
So should we start now?
We're live now?
Maybe there's a bit.
I'll get the glasses and the mask at the same time. Good morning. Thank you very much for being here today as we celebrate the life of a truly great friend, Mike Reaves. I want to thank Cathy for doing such a great job of coordinating this. She did the very best she could in light of our COVID pandemic, and thought we had a little clear sky to plan it for today, and then we get a little kind of a resurgence. But we appreciate you being here, and we want to welcome everyone who's watching on live stream. I want to thank Cruza for providing music so appropriate as we honor Mike. We need some stringed instruments. They did a great job. And I think of the many times that I would be at an event, or I planned an event, and Mike and Cathy would be part of a quartet that was there to set the tone and set the spirit. So I appreciate that. My name is Jim Hampton. I'm one of Mike Reaves' lifelong best friends. Mike's too big of a man to have one best friend, so he had several, and we'll touch on that a little bit. If you would, join me in prayer. Heavenly Father, we're grateful that this day has come, and you're allowing us to honor the memory of our great friend Mike. We thank you that he got to be a part of our life for a long time. We thank you that you blessed him with great success at all he attempted. And we thank you for that great talent, which we will forever miss. Be with us as today and encourage our words, uplift our hearts. In Jesus' name, amen. I had the good fortune to meet Mike Reaves when I was 6 years old. I'm quite a bit older than that now. I'm Mike's age. So my mother enrolled me at Hawthorne Elementary School. I had the good fortune of being placed in Mrs. Riordan's first grade class, and there was my buddy, Mike. We began a friendship right there. We sat in a circle with Joyce Wilkerson Silvernail, who's here today. We sat in a circle and read Dick and Jane and learned how to read. And that's where Mike and I began. We became inseparable and did everything together. After school activities, we were in Cub Scouts, we were in Boy Scouts. We did all that stuff that young boys did in the 50s and 60s, early 60s. It was a great time. Mike and I enjoyed many precious moments together. Life was rocking along. We were doing all that scouting stuff. And then in the 10th grade, a couple of things happened. We learned how to drive. We got driver's licenses. We got jobs. We made money. And we decided that girls were more warm and cuddly than hairy-legged guys in a pup tent on a camping trip. Scouting kind of fell off the books, and our life consisted of go to school, work after school on Saturdays so you could have a date the following weekend. So that pretty much became our life. As we got into our sophomore year, Mike established another lifelong best friend with Ronnie Perkins. And what I'd like to acknowledge at this point, Ronnie was a true and faithful friend to Cathy and to Mike in the past few years. So Cathy would have obligations with the symphony, or with the quartet, or with other responsibilities. And Ron, being a good neighbor and a good friend, would come over and stay with Mike. And Ron, I know you and I have talked about it, it's difficult to spend the evening with someone who's nonverbal. And you were there, and you were supportive, you were an encourager to Mike, and I appreciate it. Everyone here cared deeply for Mike Reaves, and you helped make those final years of his life better. Cathy, you did such a great job of directing his care. You were a primary caregiver, and you took great care of Mike in the home as long as you could, and then found a great place for him to be. He was safe, he was well cared for, and monitored, and you could go about your life, and he was safe and healthy. So I appreciate what you did, and I appreciate the children, all four of the children were very supportive of Mike. They loved their dad, and they were very supportive of their mother during those times. So that's a journey I wish you didn't have to travel, but I thank you for being there and for doing that. And thank you, Ronnie. When you don't write things down, your mind kind of drifts. But we are very grateful for that time. One thing is I kind of pine for Mike and grieve. I'm reminded that I should be joyful and glad that Mike Reaves had a long and rich life. He was very accomplished in his musicianship. I had a lot of opportunity to perform, was successful as a public school teacher, was successful with Mid-America marketing. He realized, obviously, if you're a band director, an orchestra director, you've got to go raise money. Mike was very successful with Mid-America marketing and sold candy and whatever it took. I guess he sold candles. I mean, by that point in time, I was moved out of being a band parent, but he was very successful at that. And then he went on to be very successful in creating, along with Cathy's help, the Mid-America String Quartet, and that continues on to this day. And it was always a pleasure to be anywhere where that group was able to perform. When Mike got to college at OCU, he made another lifelong best friend in Paul Childs. And Paul could not be here with us today, but he will be here on the screen, and he has a message for us, and he wants to pay a tribute to Mike. So that's Paul. And then throughout life, Paul and Mike had business ventures together. They stayed close. So there are probably other lifelong best friends that I'm not aware of. That's the nature of Mike Reaves. To know him was to love him and to embrace him and to want to be part of his life and whatever he's doing. So you'll hear from Paul. We'll have a couple other speakers, and then we'll have the honor of having Zack perform, and I guess Parisa. Are you playing the piano to accompany him? I assume that. And so we're going to have a real treat musically later in the service. So at this point, if you can turn your attention to the screen, Paul Childs will be giving us a message.
Hello, I'm Paul Childs. Although there is great sadness within all of us here today, as we lament the loss of our dear Mike, my few words are all about the happiness and humorous times I shared with my great friend. I came to Oklahoma City in 1965 from Ponca City as a student of Herbert Bagwell. Mike was likewise, and he was a year ahead of me in school. And we fell in right away and became good pals. And the following year, Don Willis and Jim Breakville followed me down from Ponca City, also violinist who studied with Mr. Bagwell. And we had a pretty good foursome with him. We would practice, normally this is a typical day, we would practice till late at night, stopping in time to go out and grab a bite to eat. And the illustrious Mr. Bagwell ran a tight ship over us all. Much of my 5 years at OCU with Mike, actually he was finished there in 1969, a year before me, were music and violin related. We had many gigs, mostly recordings, and they were always fun. I left for New York in 1970, but saw Mike often at Thanksgiving times and Christmas times, as my sister Jamie, by that time, lived in Oklahoma City. And Mike and I continued our good times. Later, we made a few trips together, such as one to Paris and London in the early 80s. I was already by then at least equally a violin and bow dealer, and I introduced Mike to my colleagues in those two cities. As we were both between marriages, there's perhaps a bit that I can't really tell here. Later, with my wife and son in tow, and Cathy as well, we made a memorable trip to Peru together. The funding for this trip came from a friend of Mike and mine, Bill McCool, who had bequeathed me some money in his will. Mike and I were great pranksters, and Bill McCool was the recipient of a few of these pranks. On our second trip to Mexico, the three of us, this was back when I was still a student at OCU with Mike, the three of us were in great need of a bath. We slept on the sides of the road, and at any rate, we found a family on a farm who, for a few pesos, let us use their outdoor enclosed shower. Mike and I went first, and then Bill went for his shower, but a little pig was running around outside, and Mike and I coaxed this pig into the shower. And it wasn't too long before there was a big scream, and the pig came running out. On our first Mexico trip, this is not really a prank, but we were driving around in Big Bend National Park. That's just adjacent to Mexico. And as there had been no service station for miles and miles, Bill, driving his Volkswagen Beetle, needed to relieve himself. So instead of pulling off, we were on a 2-lane highway. Instead of pulling off the road, no cars for miles, he stopped right in the middle of the road to relieve himself, and he got out and went, in the middle of the road. But we were kind of at the bottom of a valley and two rather high hills on either side. And sure enough, as luck would have it, he hadn't been started very long, and a car came over one of the hills. And Mike said, "Paul, you better tell him," and I said, "I'm not going to tell him." And sure enough, the car came up maybe within 100 feet of Bill, and finally he realized the car was coming upon him. And he kind of got himself together as well as he could and jumped in the car. And the car slowed down as they went by and had a good look at us, well, a good look at Bill. And it was a very young guy driving the car, maybe 16 years old, with two quite elderly ladies with their mouths just agape, as you might imagine. And finally, we drove off, and eventually Bill just said, "Bastards." So, at any rate, the last time I saw Mike, well, let's say a couple of times before I saw Mike, as well as he could, we went around our old haunts near the OCU campus. Things are drastically changed, but Mike still had his great character and humor about him, and it was nice. And I can say many are the times that I wished I had stayed in OKC and played second violin to Mike, I suppose third violin to him and Cathy once she came around. But I will always miss you, Mike.
As he's sharing in that video, I'm thinking I've edited out a lot of things that Mike and I might have been involved with, and I've decided I don't need to talk about what Ronnie and Mike might have done in high school. That's a long time ago. I want to honor my friend and not embarrass him in some way. And the stories could get way off the rails pretty quickly. Thinking about his great talent, Mike began studying violin in the 3rd grade with Ed Keller, who would come around to the schools and teach violin. and Mike started taking violin. Well, you know, about a year later, here's my friend learning to play a stringed instrument, and I ought to do everything he does. So in the 4th grade, I start taking violin, you know, rent a violin, and all I achieved was irritating and annoying the neighborhood cats. So it didn't take, and anybody in my household, and so I didn't have the stick-to-itiveness and determination that Mike did to excel as a stringed instrument violinist. But we appreciate that, and I remember those times. When Mike began teaching at Taft Junior High, Ed Keller was a supervisor in the school system, so they stayed close throughout all those years. And it's appropriate, Paul and Mike were in the orchestra directed at OCU by Ray Luke, and a great director, and he has many kind things to say about Mike and Paul and their talent at that time. Now, at this point, I would like to call Liz to come up. Liz Buno, one of Mike's daughters.
I'm always impressed by people who can read without writing it down in situations like this. So yes, Liz Buno, good to see everyone. I am one of Mike's 2 bonus daughters. I want to thank all of you who have taken time out of your day today to remember Mike. We are sad to not be able to hug those who are joining us virtually, including my sister Jennifer and her family who are not able to be here today. This is not the celebrating we had hoped for when we chose this date a couple of months ago, but we're still grateful we're able to remember him in this way. I'm going to set myself apart from, I think, all of you when I tell you this. When I first met Mike, I didn't like him. I was 7. He was dating my mom, and I wasn't okay with it, so being the wallflower that I was growing up, I made my feelings quite clear. Because of my feelings about my own parents' divorce several years earlier, I initially treated Mike terribly. I was an angry kid, and I directed much of that at him. Spoke disrespectfully, tried to drive a wedge between he and my mom. The fact that he stayed with her despite my behavior was admirable, if not miraculous. I don't remember a specific event where things changed, and I accepted that he was going to be a part of our lives, but it did change. And I think the fact that we had to work for each other's friendship in the beginning ended up making us that much closer through our lives. My early memories of Mike were of hanging out at his apartment with his daughter Jennifer, who quickly became one of my best friends and eventually my sister. Family camping trips to Lake Tenkiller, Lake Texoma, Lake Eufaula. His patience as he taught all of us to water ski. He probably taught many of you to water ski. I can still see him driving his beloved Bayliner boat, cheering, mouth open in laughter, fist pumping when any of us did something impressive or ridiculous. Tricks, spectacular falls, or sometimes my then boyfriend mooning any one of us from the back of the boat. Lake trips graduated to having our own family place, at first a trailer straight out of the 70s with brown-orange carpet and an 8-track player, and then a custom home where we spent countless summer days when Mike and my mom weren't playing a lyric show. If we were all here together, I would have you raise your hand if you ever spent time at the lake with my parents. I bet that would be many of you. If so, you know that late night by the campfire, after a few beers, Mike waxed a bit loquacious and no topic was off limits. He gave me some of the best life advice during those marathon talk sessions, and it's hard to believe I'll never have another fireside chat with him. Mike loved adventure. I have no doubt that Mike and my mom's willingness to cart us kids on big adventures through our childhood is one of the reasons I love to travel now. Multi-state road trips, the Bahamas, the Florida Keys, Hawaii, South Padre Island, Colorado, the Cayman Islands. On road trips, he loved the 2-way radio almost as much as he loved speeding. Using CB communication to try and prevent himself and others from getting pulled over. I vividly remember once when Mike got stopped for speeding, my sisters and I in the back of our big conversion van, a toddler Zack in his car seat yelling, "It's a bear! It's a bear!" The CB slang for police officer. as the highway patrolman strolled up to Mike's window. He loved telling that story. Mike's spontaneity was epic. On the tail end of a road trip to the Northeast states, the family had taken the train from Mike's old friend Paul Child's house in Montrose, New York, for a whirlwind one-day tour of New York City. During the day, we had gone to the top of the original World Trade Center, visited the Hard Rock Cafe, and that evening we got to see Phantom of the Opera on Broadway. The only other thing we had hoped to fit in was seeing the Empire State Building at night. When Phantom was over, we thought there was no way we were going to make it to the Empire State Building and then back to the last train out of the city. Mike, however, had other plans, ran up to one of the limousines waiting and asked how much to get us to the Empire State Building. $20, said the driver, and Mike said, get in. So we sped off to see the historic building. When we came out, there were no cabs waiting, and so we had to race barefoot, all us girls with our dress shoes in our hands, back to the train, and we just barely made it. Another year, on one of our post-Christmas ski trips to Colorado, we drove to check out the town of Vail. It got late, and the whole family got hungry. We were still in our ski clothes and started looking for a McDonald's or some quick meal. Evidently, fast food is not a thing in Vail. So we parked and walked into a quaint-looking joint. The host gave us a bit of a side eye and tried to decline to seat us because our dress did not meet their code. But Mike sweet-talked him, and they stuck us upstairs in a corner where I'm sure they hoped no one else could see us. We opened our menus, and the first thing we saw was the beluga caviar priced at $1,000. Mike took a deep breath, exchanged looks with my mom, and said, kids, get whatever you want, just not the caviar. As I write this, I realize how incredibly lucky we were as kids to have the experiences we did. Our parents worked incredibly hard so that we could travel and have the things we needed. The things we wanted, however, were a different story. Sure, we got cool things for birthdays or Christmas time, but any other time we had to save up to buy the Nintendo we wanted, Walkmans, hair accessories. We did chores, babysat, helped organize those candy deliveries for Mid-America Enterprises, the fundraising company my parents owned and operated as their day job. Mike and my mom felt strongly that we should understand the value of money as kids. When it was time for me to get my license and a car, the agreement was that my parents would match whatever I had been able to save towards a car. It was not much. Mike used to insist on riding with me in my 5-speed late 1980s Ford Escort GT. When I got it, I could not drive a standard, and Mike spent hours in the parking lot behind the Crystals on Northwest Expressway teaching me to drive. Hills of any grade, including our driveway, took me a while to master, and he would absolutely howl as I ka-chunk my way through stoplights, giving us mild whiplash and then peeling out. He never let me live down, leaving tire marks on our driveway trying to get my car into the garage. Mike loved my mom. Their relationship taught me what a true marital partnership can look like. They spent almost all of their time together, all their jobs, their travels, their hobbies, their free time, not for any other reason except they enjoyed each other's company that much. They rarely argued. I only remember one actual fight. Zack and I were with him on a trip to Hawaii, and he and I were milling around, waiting to head to the airport. I looked over and saw my mom and Mike by the trunk of the rental car, swatting at each other with little hands up by their chests like two little baby T-Rexes. They had made up by the end of the flight, and I was relieved to find out that the fight had been over something major, like the best way to fit all the suitcases in the trunk of the car. In every other situation I can remember, disagreements that we kids were aware of were talked out. No yelling. Our home was love, was laughter, was respect, was unconditional. Life certainly threw challenges, but I never doubted how much Mike loved me and our entire family. Mike was kind. He was hilarious. He could talk to anyone, and people who met him went from strangers to friends in minutes. He was fair. He was a great businessman. He was honest, someone you could always count on to give you the feedback that would make a difference. Mike was genuine. He was not afraid to give compliments. Building up those around him came so naturally to him. He noticed people and drew them out. He cooked an awesome steak. He got completely grossed out by any talk of blood at the dinner table, yet somehow had 3 of his 4 children go on into the medical field. We thank you, Zack, for bringing up the rear and carrying on the full-fledged musician gene. He loved his kids. He loved my mom like all spouses should love each other. He died from the disease he feared the most, but he lived exactly the way he wanted to live. I think he would have been devastated at the state in which our world sits right now. I am who I am because Mike was a part of my life. I miss him dearly, and it breaks my heart that my daughters will not get the experience of knowing him. But rather than grieve his being gone, I choose to have gratitude that he was here and will live on inside jokes, the nicknames, his quirky sayings. I've made sure that my 4-year-old knows to exclaim, "Holy Begonia," when appropriate. He'll live on in our pictures, the stories, and especially the countless amazing memories we all have with him. Thank you again for sharing today with us.
Thank you, Liz. You are certainly an accomplished writer and speaker, and you shared very much from the heart. Mike was very blessed to have you and Jessica become a part of his life, and he loved you dearly. And I appreciate your sharing with us today. At this point, I'm going to ask Jessica Wilkinson if she will come up and share a reading from Scripture.
I'll be reading the 23rd Psalm, a Psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Thank you, Jessica. I know it's difficult to come up here and speak when your heart's broken. And even though we've had some time to work through our grief, it's still a sad time. It's sad because we miss having that vibrant, dynamic man in our life. But, we just have to take comfort. And all of the stories that Liz shared with us today, it was such a great opportunity for Mike to travel, to be successful, to embrace a full family. And I'm choosing to come away from here today rejoicing in the great life that Mike had. I'll always miss him. If you didn't see him for a while, kind of like Paul alluded, if you didn't see him for a while, as soon as you did, it was immediate reconnect, and you took up right wherever you left off. And Mike had a truly magnanimous spirit. At this point, I'm going to ask a friend of Cathy and Mike's, Larry Reed, if he would come and share.
Thank you, Jim. There's a common theme here. Today, I'm speaking on behalf of the Reed family. My wife, Lisa, called him Mikey. My kids called him Uncle Mike. Mike often called me Lance. Lisa was Liesel. He had his nicknames for pretty much everyone. I called him one of my very best friends. As you all know from personal experience and from a lot of the sentiments expressed here today, Mike was pretty much unlike any other. It was always, always so easy for me to get along with him. That easygoing kind-heartedness just made him a joy to be around. Lisa and I knew him as a musical colleague in many ways. He was a very fine player, and we all performed together in Oklahoma City, in the Lawton Philharmonic, and in all sorts of gigs throughout the years. I remember knowing who Mike was back in the early 1970s when I first played bassoon in the old Oklahoma City Symphony, which was the predecessor of the Oklahoma Symphony, the old Oklahoma Symphony. I doubt he knew who I was. He was older than me, and we didn't travel in the same circles back then. All that changed when I moved back into the music scene in the early 1980s after having been gone for a few years. When Mike and Cathy got together, and when Lisa and I got together, we quickly became very close friends, spent much time together, eating, drinking, laughing, sharing stories. After Mike and Cathy bought land and a place at Lake Eufaula, we shared such special time there with our families. Mike was well known for his joy of bonfires under the stars and for his nighttime boat rides. I can still hear him say that. Our families shared many ski trips to Colorado. I think both Cathy and Mike just love being in the outdoors and being active. I ponder the special conversations that Mike and I had. I think I did learn much from his non-confrontational perspective on things. Mike was surely in charge as a highly sought-after contractor for lots of concerts in the area. He knew all the rules, and he enforced them to the benefit of the players. There were only 2 times that I remember Mike being really, really angry. One was when he was pushed to bend the rules about a recording issue for a union gig. When the conductor just would not give up, I witnessed firsthand Mike literally getting into his face and emphatically making his point where there remained no further confusion as to the issue. Mike was a person of unquestioned integrity in such matters and in his life. Mike had 3 main things that my father used to tell me that it takes to be successful: integrity, intelligence, and industry. In other words, honesty, knowing his job through study and experience, and a willingness to work hard to achieve his goals. I always admired him for that. I know it was tough for Mike to acknowledge when it was time to retire from playing. I know that music performance filled his soul as much as it does mine. However, he did it selflessly and with grace. He lived his entire life with grace. He lived his life with a joy of all that was around him. A friendship with Mike usually did last a lifetime. I never knew him to carry a grudge. He had some wonderful and often colorful stories. He also told me of some sorrows in his life, particularly from his youth and the untimely passing of his father. I know that these sentiments and memories are shared by many of you. That's just who Mike Reaves was. While Lisa and I were fortunate that he made us feel special as friends, I know that he had the capacity to make pretty much everyone around him feel special. What a gift of a person in my life and in the life of our family. What wonderful memories I will carry for the rest of my days. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Larry. I'm reminded, as you talked about the nicknames, I don't think he called anybody straight up by their name. So my wife, Cherry, whom he knew from OCU, she was a vocal performance major, and he was obviously in the orchestra. But she was Apple. He couldn't call her Cherry, he called her Apple. And so to this day, if he were able to come in here and see her, he would call her Apple. And it was just, that was his nature. I cannot say in mixed company what he called me. So it's, we leave that one in the bar ditch, but that was part of his sense of humor. We're honored today to have Joel Levine here to speak and to share. Wonderful conductor of the Oklahoma City Philharmonic Orchestra and a good friend of Mike Reaves. So Maestro.
Mike's nickname for me was Big Guy. Hey, Big Guy. It occurs to me that he was not referring to my height. He was the big guy. We heard today about him talking rather sternly to a conductor. I'd like to make it clear that that wasn't me. However, in my early days as the music director of the new Oklahoma City Philharmonic, I wasn't always the most patient person in the world. I was trying to move things forward as quickly as I could. We had lost the Oklahoma Symphony, which was full-time professional orchestra, and now we were working to get the Philharmonic forward. So I wasn't always patient, and Mike said to me once, you know, some of the things you say to us makes me want to chew nails. And I thought, I think I need to tone it down in rehearsal a little bit. Let me tell you about how I first discovered Mike. I was the associate conductor of the former orchestra, the Oklahoma Symphony, and Mike was in the second violin section. But I didn't necessarily know everyone really well until the last season that that orchestra played. And the management of the orchestra, the manager was a very close friend, still is, made what I thought was a really horrible decision. The harpist had retired the previous year, at the end of the previous year, and it was decided not to replace the harp. So the last year that the Oklahoma Symphony played, it was an orchestra that did not have a harpist, except on rare occasions for major classics concerts, but for the several hundred young people's concerts that we played, there was no harp. Now, part of a young people's concert is explaining the orchestra to the kids. We would go to the schools, and of course, most of them had never seen an orchestra. So I would, at some point, have the flutes stand up, have the clarinets stand up. Well, unbeknownst to me, a certain violinist had snuck a giant life-size cardboard picture of a harp. And of course, I wasn't going to say anything about the harp because there wasn't one. But at the end of my demonstrations, suddenly this very tall gentleman stood up and lifted up a big cardboard cutout of a harp. And I thought, what do I do? This is quite a challenge. So I said, boys and girls, if we had a harp, that's what it would look like. And that's how I met Mike. During the next season, and quite naturally, it was a strike for a year, and Mike supported that, and I completely agree with the need for the musicians of the orchestra to have achieved their goals. It didn't work out, and when the time came to start the Philharmonic, Mike was one of the leading voices in the city to help get the orchestra started, Mike and Cathy. And I think without Mike's support, that orchestra might not have happened, or I should say this orchestra might not have happened, because it wasn't obvious that it was a great idea. It wasn't obvious that it would work. It was very not obvious, and there was a lot of dispute. It was a tricky situation. And so musicians in town looked to those who were leaders in the musical community. And Mike was just such a man, and his decision to publicly join and support the founding of the Philharmonic was critical to getting it going. I spent my entire time with the orchestra trying to get revenge on Mike for the harp thing. For example, I asked him in front of the audience one night if he would please stand. And he looked a little puzzled, but did. And I said, ladies and gentlemen, he turned 40 today. So I had my little revenge moment by revealing Mike's birthday, because he always looked 20. If you know what I'm talking about. I mean, Mike was the youngest looking man ever. You could not have guessed his age, whatever age he was at. He kept me honest. If he felt that something was going well or not well, he would tell me. He was kind about it, very kind, but honest. And that doesn't always happen in the music world. Everyone wants to protect their colleagues. Everyone wants to make life smooth and easy. And Mike was ready for it to be smooth and easy if that was possible. But if we needed to work together to improve something, he was there. He was always there. He loved to know what was going on. And I loved to know what was going on. So we would have our little backstage moments, and he never broke confidences that he shouldn't, but it was always a moment of gathering in the hallway or some dark corner to discuss what's going on. That was the fun. He really was an outstanding violinist, and it was such a pleasure for me to be able to see Mike and Cathy sit side by side, and for me it was like right there, and watch them work together and make music together and lead the second violin section with such grace and class. And it was a happy orchestra because there were people of leadership roles like Mike in it. I will never be able to say thank you the way I would like to. By the time Mike left the orchestra, communications were harder, but I hope he knows that without his help and support and without his beautiful playing and leadership, it would not be the orchestra it is today. Mike, I miss you very much. And one last little thing, as I would leave the podium after every piece, I passed directly next to Mike. He was the closest person there, and Cathy was just on the other side. I would try to make him laugh by saying something outrageous as I walked off the podium. I never could get him to break. He was always, he would laser focus on the audience and do his professional smile of thanking them for their applause while I'm walking by going, Well, that was a really not so good performance, and never could break him. So Mike, you're in our hearts forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Joel. Like many of us, you are both the victim and the beneficiary of Mike and his humor, depending on which way the sword slashed on that particular day. But it was always in good fun and humor and a very good intention. At this point, if you'll turn your attention to the screen, we're going to have a slideshow, gallery of memories of some of the great things that we've heard from the family today, and I hope you'll enjoy that. Thank you. That was a wonderful tribute, and it causes me to be reminded again of the rich, full life that Mike got to enjoy. He got to have a lot of good times, and those will live on. Those memories will live on. All of his mischief, but all of his talent and all of his accomplishments, and the love he had for his family is what I choose to keep in my heart. At this point, we're going to have the Mike clone come up. That's Zack, and when I see Zack, outside I have to look a little higher up to see Zack than I did even Mike, but very much the image of Mike, and so Mike left us with a living legacy. Zack, you don't need this stand on the box.
I definitely do not.
No. This podium was built for you.
So as Jim was just saying, for those of you who don't know me, I am Mike's professional lookalike and impersonator. Patrick, can we see the side by side? There you go. All right, that's enough of that. No, of course, it wouldn't be a proper Mike Reaves memorial without some silly jokes, would it? I'm Mike's son, Zack. Many of you have known me since the day I was born. I'm pretty sure Mom and Dad took me to my first rehearsal when I was about 2 weeks old. I'm his baby boy, as he often called me, even near the end when he could barely speak or remember a thing. But I truly could be like his twin brother. I'm lucky to not only have his height, actually I'm a little taller, he did not like that, his good looks, but also I have his sense of humor, his passion for music, and his love for bringing people together. As I was trying to figure out exactly what to say, exactly how to say everything that I wanted to say today, it occurred to me that it's been almost exactly a year and a half since we lost Dad. It's been a year and a half of lockdowns, disease, being separated from our loved ones, protests, and seemingly irreconcilable divisions. It's remarkable to think about how much has changed in that time. Frankly, I'm actually glad that he didn't have to see any of that. During the last couple of years of Dad's life, I think we all got so preoccupied with taking care of him that we kind of forgot just how great the relationships we had with him were. What I've been grateful for in this time since he's passed is not only that we were able, it's something that I don't take for granted considering how many people were not able to be with their loved ones this past year as they passed, and we were fortunate to have that privilege. But I've also been allowed the time to reflect on just how great of a dad he was. He was my best friend, and I had forgotten that in all that time. A few months ago, when I was first writing out what I was going to say today, I had written about how we continued to delay Dad's memorial so that we could properly throw the kind of party that he deserved. After all, you all know how much he loved a good party. But the world had other plans. It is not the party that we had envisioned, but ultimately today is an important step in giving our family peace and closure. Dad was always big on working best with what the world gives you. And so we're grateful to not only have some of our close family and friends here today, but are also grateful to all those who are watching online with us and sending us their love right now. I think that's the Mike you all knew and loved. Dad loved bringing people together, whether it was a party at Ski Island, a retreat to Lake Eufaula, or a gig he contracted. He adored every single one of his friends and cherished every moment he had with each of you. And man, did he love having a good time. So, in honor of Dad, I think it's time to have a little fun, at his expense, of course. I'd like to reminisce on some important lessons that I learned from Dad over the years. Work before play, also known as work hard, play hard. This might as well have been Dad's life motto. Honestly, I'm still working on this one, as I have a tendency to be the ultimate procrastinator. Sorry, Dad. No matter if you knew him as a violinist, a gig contractor, teacher, or through his candy fundraising business, Dad was a workaholic, no doubt about it. He would often stay up past midnight so that he could either finish writing up a gig contract, a candy order, get a little bit more practice done for an upcoming gig, or just catching up on emails. Of course, anything involving a computer, this was generally necessary as he was technologically illiterate. He resisted getting email for as long as he could, and then when he finally caved, he still only typed with 2 fingers. Honestly, it was actually quite impressive. Dad started working on the work before play method with me from a very young age. As soon as I was old enough to carry small boxes of candy from the warehouse, I became his employee. I was maybe 5 years old. In the early days, he paid me with Skittles, or whatever candy was available from a box that might have been damaged in transit. But later on, when I was no longer tired from carrying just 1 or 2 boxes, he paid me properly. In fact, as my sister Liz alluded to, this is how I purchased my first car. All through middle school and early high school, he not only paid me above minimum wage, but also matched what I saved towards purchasing a car. Kind of like a pension plan for middle schoolers, if you will. While we're on the topic of candy, we do have small bags of M&Ms for you all in the lobby when you leave, for those of you who are in person with us today. You can honor Dad's memory by either eating said candy, or you can sell it for $1 and donate the proceeds to a 2nd grade soccer team looking to raise funds for their upcoming tournament. Later on, when I was an advanced enough cellist, Dad started hiring me to play weddings and events with his and Mom's group, the Mid-America String Quartet. And these weren't just any gigs, these were union gigs, adult pension and all. I didn't think much of these gigs at the time, but looking back on things, I really cherish the fact that I got paid to make music with my parents for all those years. Getting that valuable experience early on really shaped my musical future in a lot of ways, and I'm forever grateful for that. Of course, his motto was work before play, but luckily as musicians, we often get to work and play at the same time. Next up, contracts. Okay, Dad probably hired a lot of you for gigs. In fact, he probably hired a lot of you for a lot of gigs. After all, he did commonly refer to himself as the gig and fool. But while many of you were signing gig contracts, Dad also had me signing some contracts, moral contracts. If he and I came to an agreement about something that I was supposed to do, that dude wanted it in writing, signed and dated. If I ever started to stray away from our agreement, he did not hesitate to pull that contract out of the desk drawer. He'd say, "I'm sorry, but am I mistaken, or is this your signature right here?" My personal favorite was during my senior year of high school, when I started taking cello lessons from a renowned teacher, Andres Diaz, in Dallas. I would drive down every other week and take a 2 to 3 hour long lesson, and I was expected to practice a minimum of 3 hours a day, and boy, were those lessons expensive. In order to make it work, my parents paid for half of the lessons, my grandparents paid for 25%, and I paid for 25%. This is a huge opportunity for me, and basically my whole family had a financial stake in it. So my mom and dad were not about to let me screw it up. Dad made me sign a contract stating that I would practice 3 hours a day, pay for 25% of the lessons, and that I wouldn't complain anytime that my parents had to remind me of those details. I think that's a perfect segue into the next lesson. Your word is your bond. Unless it's my word, of course, because, moral contracts. But Dad was big on never making promises you can't keep. And if you did make a promise you couldn't keep, you had to drop everything and keep that promise anyways. And if you really couldn't keep that promise, you had to suffer the embarrassment that came with explaining honestly just exactly why you're such a jerk and can't be trusted. Do that enough times, and eventually you stop making promises that you can't keep. However, there was exactly one exception that I can remember. Just before my senior year of high school, I was accepted into the Innsbruck Institute near St. Louis, and this was my first serious music festival outside of the state of Oklahoma. This was a huge opportunity for my growth as a musician, and I would get to meet and work with some of the most prominent chamber musicians and teachers across the country, including a certain someone by the name of Andres Diaz, who had coincidentally signed his contract with SMU in Dallas just about 2 weeks prior. There was only one problem. Months earlier, I had promised my then girlfriend that I would attend her dance recital, which conflicted with part of this music festival. I had missed the recital the previous year, and I was in hot water for it, so I was not about to miss this recital again. Dad was a little bit torn. On one hand, he was really proud that I was a man of my word, just like he'd taught me. But on the other hand, he was wondering how he raised me to be a man who had no idea how to prioritize. Long story short, he and Mom made me go to that music festival. I said, "But how am I going to explain this to my girlfriend? I'm just trying to be a man of my word, like you taught me." "And that's amazing and honorable," he said. "But when you talk to her, your mother and I will gladly take 100% of the blame." So I went to that festival, and it changed my life forever. I can't tell you exactly what would have happened had I gone to the dance recital, but I can tell you what wouldn't have happened. I wouldn't have begun studying cello with Mr. Diaz in Dallas. I wouldn't have signed that moral contract about practicing 3 hours a day and paying for 25% of my lessons. I wouldn't have gone on to study music at SMU on scholarship. I wouldn't have met a brilliant, beautiful, and talented woman named Parisa Zaeri, to who I am now happily married. I wouldn't have become a cellist for a professional string quartet that traveled the world and performed in venues like Carnegie Hall, a job that had a major impact on who I am as a person and an artist. And if I hadn't spent that 7 years in that string quartet, I most likely wouldn't have gotten the opportunity to come back and teach here for a year at OCU, my dad's alma mater, which also allowed for me to spend time with Dad nearly every week for the last 6 months of his life. It's like he predicted the future. He used to say, "Buddy, I know you better than you know yourself." I always fought it, but he was always right. But not even he could have known just how huge that decision to skip that dance recital would have been. Okay, last thing, nicknames. You've heard some references. If you spent any significant amount of time with my dad, I'm going to bet that you probably had a nickname. I'm actually curious. We don't have as many people here as we had originally planned, but if you can remember one of your nicknames, can you just like shout it out right now, like congregation style? I would love to encourage anybody watching online to also comment whatever their nickname was. I do have to share some of my favorites. Royce McLarry, Royster the Oyster. My first cello teacher, Jim Shelley, Shell Shocked. You heard Larry and Lisa Reed, Lance and Liesel. Densey Rushing, the dense one. And then there were the family nicknames. For my mom, she had many, but one of my favorites was Chatterin. My brother-in-law, J-Bag. And then my sisters. Jen turned into Skin, which then eventually evolved into Skinersha, and then finally Skinersha Breath. Don't ask me. Liz became Lizard, which turned into Gizzard. Jess, whose last name was Sack, was Jessica Sack. That eventually turned into her theme song. Jessica Sack, bum, ba-dum, bum, bum. Literally every time she walked through the door. Then there's mine, RB. You may be wondering how Zachary managed to evolve into RB. It's a little bit of a stretch, and this is only one strain of nicknames, I have to tell you, but I will walk you through the process. Okay. Zachary, Zach, Zeke, Ezekiel, Ease, Easy, Easy Rider, then just Rider, Ride Man, Ride Boy, RB. And I responded to every single one of them. This was an art form, and he had it down to perfection. He knew my wife was a keeper when I brought her to meet my parents after only a few months of us dating, and she already had about 5 nicknames for me. He knew it meant she really liked me. When Dad finally lost the ability to swallow, we knew that the end would come at any moment. When my mom told me, I backed out of the concert that I was supposed to play that night in Colorado and took the next flight back here to Oklahoma. Dad laid in his bed, sedated, for several days. But for the entire time, my mom, my sisters, my wife, and myself each took turns being with him. Even at night, one of us would sleep in the chair next to him, just so there wasn't a chance that he would die alone. But in true Mike Reaves fashion, he waited until that Monday morning when all of us were in the room having a good time. We had been laughing and sharing so many stories together. We had quite literally just finished going through that list of nicknames I just mentioned, not even a minute before he took his last breath. He waited until he could hear us laugh together one last time. He wanted to know that we were having a good time. He brought us together the only way that Mike Reaves could. I'm going to segue somehow into performing a piece that I actually wrote for Dad just before he passed. It's a solo cello piece called Otho. And the piece begins in mystery and suspended time as a way to illustrate the way that Dad might have felt while he was trying to process the hallucinations and the perceived alternate reality, the common symptoms of Lewy body dementia. It also tries to express the uncertainty and sorrow that was expressed among my family during that time. But gradually, the piece transitions into a celebration of Dad's wonderful life, with particular appreciation for his kind nature and strong character. The final bar is full of conflict. There's strong harmony in the B major interval of the lower strings of the cello, but uncertainty about the life beyond expressed in the dissonant left hand pizzicato in the upper strings. I completed the work on February 8th, 2020, just almost 2 weeks before Dad passed. He passed away on February 24th, 2020, and I played this piece for him the day before he passed while he was laying on his deathbed. The formal premiere came March 8th, just a couple weeks after that, right here at Oklahoma City University, Dad's alma mater. The title Otho comes from my dad's middle name, Michael Otho Reaves, which he shared with my grandfather, William Otho Reaves, who unfortunately died after being struck by a drunk driver 17 years before I was born. This piece is my way of honoring them both.
Unlike Zack, I use the box. Podium was built for a man of his stature, and we have to have cheaters for people of my stature. So thank you very much for sharing. You honored your father with that piece and with the playing of it at this time, and it is so appropriate. In hearing you speak about all the nicknames, you probably didn't know that he was also Otho the Space Mouse. In junior high, we had to write a theme, and he and I didn't do anything straight, nothing. And so he was Otho the Space Mouse in a theme that maybe I still have in the archives of my school papers. And he wrote a theme about Howard the Coward. My middle name's Howard. And so those things live on. Our teachers I know for a fact they were dismayed. If Mike and I were in the same class, there was no containing our enthusiasm for the bizarre. Again, I want to thank each of you for coming. I want to thank those of you who have shared stories to help fill in the blanks for Mike's wonderful life. What a great memory we take from this place today. Everyone who spoke added so much to the service and to the tribute for Mike. And I thank you. I pray peace with you as you go from this place, and forever hold Mike dear to your heart, and do it with that smirk. Like he always had. Zack's got a wonderful smile. You know, he's $1 million smile. His dad had more of a little mischievous smirk. That's how I remember Mike. So, Zack, keep up the good work. Thank you very much again. Thank you. You are dismissed.